Rain streaked down the grimy windows of Daisy's diner like tears from a sky too tired to hold them back. The neon sign outside flickering weakly against the storm. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and grease, a familiar perfume to Lila Harper, who stood behind the counter wiping down the chipped laminate with a rag that had seen better days. At 26, Lila was a fixture here, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, her hazel eyes sharp but weary, her apron stained with the ghosts of a dozen spilled orders. Double shifts had carved lines into her young face, but she wore them like badges of honor. She'd been slinging plates and pouring coffee since she was 18. And though the $2 tips and aching feet were grinding her down, she still greeted every soul who walked through that door with a smile that could melt frost off a windshield. Tonight, was funnier, though we're in Emmanuel. Her shoulders slumped a little lower. Her breast came a little shallower. The rain wasn't the only thing wearing thin. The bell above the door jangled, a harsh sound cutting through the hum of the old jukebox, crooning Patsy Cline in the corner. Lila glanced up, expecting another trucker or a late-night straggler from the bar down the street. Instead, a man stepped inside, shaking water from a tailored coat that probably cost more than her rent for a year. His polished loafers clicked against the cracked linoleum, each step echoing in the nearly empty diner like a drum roll announcing something big. Lila's stomach did a little flip, not because he was handsome though he was, in a sharp, angular way, but because she knew him. Everyone did. That was Ethan Caldwell, the tech billionaire who'd been splashed across every news channel for weeks. His name tangled in whispers of shady deals and worker strikes. What the hell was he doing here, in a nowhere joint off Route 66? "Welcome to Daisy's," Lila said, her voice steady despite the jolt of recognition buzzing through her. She slid a laminated menu across the counter, her fingers brushing the edge as she forced her smile to stay put. "What can I get you to drink?" Ethan didn't look up from the spot he'd fixated on, a stain on the counter shaped vaguely like Texas. "Coffee, black." His tone was clipped, like he was barking an order to an assistant, not a waitress in a dive diner at 11 p. Sorry, Lila nodded, biting back the urge to say something snarky, and turned toward the kitchen. The coffee pot hissed as she poured, steam curling up to warm her chilled hands. She darted a glance back at him, his broad shoulders hunched under that fancy coat, his dark hair damp and mussed, his jaw tight like he was chewing on something bitter. "That's Ethan Caldwell," she whispered to Tommy, the line cook, who was scrubbing grease off the flat top with a grunt. Tommy, a wiry guy with a beard that looked like steel wool, peeked over his shoulder and shrugged. "Rich bastard like that. Beats me." Maybe his private jet broke down. Tommy's laugh was a rough bark, but Lila didn't join in. Something about Ethan's posture, the way he sat so still, like a statue about to crack, gnawed at her. She carried the mug back, setting it down with a soft clink. Up close, she saw the shadows under his eyes, deep and bruised, and the faint tremble in his hands as he reached for the coffee. He looked broken. Not the untouchable titan she'd seen on TV, but a man who'd been running on fumes too long. "Here you go. She said, softer than she meant to. "Let me know if you need anything else." Ethan gave a curt nod, his gray eyes flicking up to hers for half a second before dropping back to the mug. Lila lingered, her gut telling her to stay, but she forced herself to walk away, busying herself with wiping down a table that didn't need it. The diner was dead, just her, Tommy, one in the room, and this ghost of a billionaire staring into his untouched coffee like it held the answers to whatever was eating him alive. 10 minutes later, she couldn't stand it anymore. She drifted back to his table, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the floor. "Everything okay?" she asked, leaning one hip against the booth across from him. It was a risk. Most customers didn't want a waitress prying, but something about him screamed for it. Ethan exhaled, a long, ragged sound that seemed to pull the air out of the room. He ran a hand through his hair, mussing it further, and when he looked at her, his eyes were raw, unguarded. "No, Tolo, not really." Lila surprised herself by sliding into the booth across from him, the cracked vinyl creaking under her weight. Her heart thudded, but she kept her voice calm. "Steady. You want to talk about it?" He He stared at her, his expression flickering between shock and something softer, like relief. You wouldn't get it." "Try me," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. She didn't know why she cared. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his face, or the way he seemed so out of place, like a lost kid in a suit worth millions. Whatever it was, it hooked her. You're Tarzan. For a moment, Ethan said nothing, his fingers tightening around the mug. Then, Yoranin, like a dam splintering under too much pressure. He started talking. His voice was low, rough, like he hadn't spoken this honestly in years. He told her about the empire he'd built, billions of dollars, thousands of employees, a name that opened doors and shut mouths. But then came the cracks, the sleepless nights, the boardroom battles, the headlines calling him a monster. He admitted to things that made Lila's stomach twist, cutting wages to boost stock prices, ignoring safety complaints to meet deadlines, watching profits soar while his soul sank. I don't even recognize myself anymore, he said, his voice breaking on the last word. Everyone wants a piece of me, money, power, certainty, favors, but no one gives a damn about what it's doing to me. Lila listened, her chest tight with a mix of pity and anger. She didn't know this world of private jets and penthouses, but she knew what it felt like to be trapped, to pour everything into something and still feel empty. When he finally stopped, his head bowed like he was waiting for judgment. She took a deep breath. I'm no billionaire, she said, her voice quiet but firm. But I get feeling stuck. I've been pouring coffee and flipping burgers for 8 years, and some days I wonder if this is all I'll ever be. But money, it doesn't fix that hole inside you. If you keep running yourself into the ground, you're going to lose more than your company. You'll lose you and the people who matter. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Searching her face like he couldn't believe what he'd heard. No one talked to him like that, not his board, not his so-called friends, not the army of yes-men who trailed him like shadows. They either kissed his ass or stabbed his back. But this waitress, this stranger with a faded apron and a voice like warm honey, she saw through the bullshit. For the first time in years, he felt seen. The next morning, Lila was bleary-eyed, pouring coffee for the breakfast rush when the TV above the counter blared to life. Ethan's face filled the screen, his tie crisp but his expression softer than she'd seen it. I'm stepping down as CEO of Caldwell Tech, he said, his voice steady as reporters shouted over each other. Effective immediately. I'll be redirecting my focus and a significant portion of my personal wealth to a new charitable foundation. The diner went quiet, forks pausing midair. As he went on, I've spent too long chasing numbers. It's time to chase something real. Lila's mug slipped in her hand, coffee sloshing onto the counter. She stared at the screen, her pulse racing. Had he listened to her? Had her words, scribbled on the back of a napkin in her mind, actually reached him? She wiped up the spill, her hands shaky, her mind spinning with a mix of disbelief and pride. 3 days later, the bell jangled again. And there he was, Ethan Caldwell, back in Daisy's diner. No suit this time, just a sweater and jeans that still looked too expensive for the place. He slid into the same booth, his posture looser, his eyes brighter. Lila approached, her heart doing that stupid flip again. Didn't expect to see you back here, she said, half teasing. I owe you, he said, his voice warm. Sincere, you were right. I was losing myself, and I didn't even see it. That night, it changed everything. She smiled, a little flustered. Glad I could help. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, sliding it across the table. I'm starting that foundation I mentioned. It's for people who work hard but get screwed by the system. People like you. I'd like you to help me run it. Lila blinked, her breath catching. Mimik Martin, E.T.U. I'm just a waitress. You're more than that, Ethan said, leaning forward. You've got a heart bigger than this whole damn town, and you know what it's like to fight for every scrap. That's what this needs. She took the card, her fingers trembling as she read the words. Caldwell Hope Foundation. A week later, she hung up her apron for good, stepping into a world she'd never imagined. With Ethan, she built programs, food banks for struggling families, scholarships for kids like she'd been training for folks stuck in dead-end jobs. Her voice, once drowned out by the clatter of plates, now shaped lives. And Ethan, he traded boardroom battles for something messier, truer. Success wasn't a dollar sign anymore. It was the light in a kid's eyes when they got their first diploma, the relief on a mother's face when she could pay her rent. It all started with a rainy night, a cup of coffee, and a waitress who dared to speak up. Lila Harper didn't just save Ethan Caldwell. She gave him a reason to save himself. And together, was a sub-breather. They turned his empire of glass into a legacy of hope. Lila Harper stood in the cramped office of the Caldwell Hope Foundation, a repurposed storefront with peeling paint and a single flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. It was a far cry from the gleaming towers of Ethan Caldwell's old life. But to her, it felt like a palace. She clutched a stack of papers, proposals for a job training program she'd spent nights sketching out on her tiny kitchen table, fueled by instant coffee and a stubborn flicker of belief. Her hazel eyes scanned the numbers, her brow furrowing as she chewed the end of a pencil. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, but the weight of this new role pressed down on her shoulders like a stack of diner trays. Could she really do this? Could she turn her scrappy ideas into something that mattered? The door creaked open, and Ethan stepped in, balancing 2 cups of coffee from the bodega down the street. He'd traded his tailored suits for a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, but his presence still filled the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that quiet intensity that made people stop and listen. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting a cup on her cluttered desk. His voice was softer now, less clipped, like the edges had been sanded down since that night at Daisy's. Lila took the cup, her fingers brushing his for a split second, sending a jolt up her arm she didn't have time to dwell on. "Thanks, Owen," she muttered, blowing on the steam. "I'm drowning in this stuff. Half of it's gibberish to me. Budgets, grants or washes shurimush, tax codes. I'm used to balancing plates, not spreadsheets or a. Ethan pulled up a chair, the metal scraping against the worn hardwood floor. He sat across from her, his gray eyes steady. "Warm, you're doing fine. Better than fine. To raise your money line lines. That proposal you wrote, it's good. Zuri, Lila, really good," she snorted, pushing a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Yeah. Right. Sir, Punama. I barely graduated high school. Ethan, you're the one with the fancy degrees and the billion-dollar brain. I'm just winging it." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze locking with hers. "You think I knew what I was doing when I started my company? I was 22, cocky, and scared shitless. Half the time, I was guessing. You've got something I didn't have back then. Guts. Real guts. And you care. That's why this works." Lila's throat tightened, her chest fluttering with something she couldn't name. Pride. Maybe, or the shock of being seen by someone like him. She ducked her head, hiding the flush creeping up her cheeks. "Well, farmer, don't get too excited. We've got no funding yet, and this place looks like it's one stiff breeze from falling apart." Ethan grinned, a rare flash of teeth that made him look younger. "Less haunted. Give it time. We'll get there." Kasikuran. Together, that word, and together, hung in the air. Heavy with promise, Lila didn't know what to do with it. So she took a sip of coffee instead, letting the bitter warmth ground her. She'd spent years alone, scraping by, her only company the hum of the diner's fridge and the occasional grumble from Tommy. Now here she was, shoulder to shoulder with a man who'd once been untouchable, building something from nothing. It terrified her. It thrilled her. Weeks bled into months, and the foundation took shape like a patchwork quilt, rough around the edges but stitched with purpose. Lila threw herself into it, her days a blur of meetings with social workers, late nights drafting flyers, and trips to crumbling neighborhoods where people eyed her with suspicion. She didn't blame them. She'd been them. After all, distrusting anyone who promised help. But she kept showing up, her voice steady as she explained the programs. Free classes for GEDs, workshops for trades, a hotline for single moms who didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Slowly, the wariness faded. People started nodding, then smiling, then signing up. Ethan was there too, quieter but no less driven. He handled the big picture stuff, schmoozing donors, cutting through red tape with a precision that reminded Lila he'd once ruled boardrooms. But he deferred to her on the ground level, trusting her instincts in a way that made her stomach flip. One afternoon, as they sorted donated clothes in a dusty warehouse, he paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're a natural at this," he said, his tone almost reverent. "I've got the money, but you've got the soul." Lila laughed, shoving a box of sweaters toward him. "Don't get sappy on me. Caldwell. Lerma masurna shermanon resum. I'm just stubborn, is all. It's more than that," he insisted, his eyes lingering on her a beat too long. "You make people believe in this. In us." Her breath hitched, when arm ones, and she turned away. busying herself with a tangle of scarves. She wasn't ready for whatever that look meant. Not yet. But it stuck with her, a quiet ember glowing in the back of her mind. The first big win came 6 months in. They'd landed a grant, $50. Enough to launch the job training program Lila had dreamed up. She stood in the middle of the storefront-turned-classroom, watching as a dozen adults shuffled in. Men with calloused hands, women with tired eyes, all of them carrying the weight of too many slammed doors. Lila's heart pounded as she welcomed them, her voice shaking just a little. "This is your shot," she said, gripping the podium Ethan had hauled in from God knows where. Not a handout, not a promise that'll fall through. A real chance. We're here to help you take it. When the class ended, a woman named Carla, mid-40s, with a smoker's rasp and a kid at home, grabbed Lila's hand. "I haven't felt hope in years," she said, tears streaking her lined face. "Thank you." Lila squeezed back, her own eyes stinging. And when Carla left, she sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Ethan found her there, his shadow falling across her as he leaned against the doorframe. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, swiping at her cheeks. "Yeah, more some just didn't expect it to feel like this." He crouched beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint cedar of his cologne. "You're changing lives. Lila, ir neua." "That's what it feels like." She met his gaze, and for a moment, the world shrank to just them. Two people who'd stumbled into each other and somehow built something bigger than themselves. Then the moment broke, and she stood, brushing off her jeans. "Come on," she said, a grin tugging at her lips. "We've got work to do." The foundation grew, its roots digging deeper into the community. Lila became a familiar face, tough but kind, a woman who'd clawed her way up and now held the ladder for others. Ethan shed more of his old skin, his smiles coming easier, his hands dirtier from pitching in. They fought sometimes over budgets, priorities, the best way to stretch a dollar, but it was the kind of fighting that sharpened them, not broke them. One night, after a long day of hauling supplies for a new food pantry, they sat on the stoop outside the office, sharing a lukewarm beer. The sky was clear, stars punching through the dark, and Lila felt a rare calm settle over her. Ethan nudged her shoulder, his arm warm against hers. "You ever think about where we'd be if I hadn't walked into that diner?" She tilted her head, studying him. "Yes, Mom. Heard in a router machine. I'd still be pouring coffee, and you'd still be miserable in a corner office." He chuckled, low and rough. "Guess we saved each other." Lila's heart stuttered, but she didn't look away. "Guess we did." They didn't say more. Didn't need to. The foundation wasn't just their work. It was their tether. A lifeline spun from a rainy night in a bold conversation. And as the months turned to years, it grew into something neither could have dreamed. A beacon for the forgotten. A testament to what happens when two broken people decide to build instead of break. The air in the Caldwell Hope Foundation's office was thick with the scent of fresh paint and possibility. Lila Harper stood in the center of what used to be a storage closet but was now a small classroom, its walls a soft blue she'd picked out herself. She ran her fingers along the edge of a whiteboard, her nails catching on a smudge of marker. It was late, past 9 p. And the building was quiet except for the faint hum of a vacuum down the hall where a volunteer was tidying up. Lila's body ached from a day spent hauling desks and stacking books, but her mind was electric, buzzing with the kind of tired that felt like triumph. Tomorrow, what you want? This room would host its first literacy class for adults who'd never had the chance to learn. She could already picture their faces, nervous, hopeful, maybe a little ashamed. She'd been there once, too, hiding her own gaps in school behind a quick smile and a quicker wit. This room, this program, in Maywar Simonin, it was for them. And for her, too. In a way, the door swung open, and Ethan Caldwell stepped in, his flannel shirt untucked, a streak of dust on his cheek from moving furniture all afternoon. He held a pizza box in one hand, the cardboard sagging under the weight of extra cheese, Lila's favorite. Though she'd never admit she'd noticed he always ordered it. "Figured you'd still be here," he said, his voice carrying that easy warmth that had become as familiar as the creak of the diner's old floorboards. "You ever stop working?" Lila shot him a mock glare, brushing her hands on her jeans. Says the guy who was here till midnight last week sweet-talking that grant board on Zoom. She crossed her arms, but a smile tugged at her lips. What's with the pizza? Trying to bribe me into going home. Ethan set the box on a desk, flipping it open to reveal a steaming pie that made Lila's stomach growl loud enough to echo. He grinned, catching the sound. Bribe. Reward, call it what you want. You've been killing it. Lily, this place. He gestured around the room, his gray eyes softening as they took in the neat rows of chairs, the stack of workbooks she'd labeled by hand. It's incredible. You're incredible. Her cheeks warmed, and she ducked her head, busying herself with grabbing a slice to avoid his gaze. Yeah. Well, don't let it go to my head. I'm still figuring this out. She took a bite, the cheese burning her tongue. But she didn't care. It was easier to focus on the pizza than the way Ethan's words made her heart do a clumsy somersault. She wasn't used to praise, not like this. Not from someone who saw her so clearly, it was almost unnerving. He leaned against the whiteboard, crossing his arms, his expression shifting to something quieter, more serious. You ever think about how far we've come? 2 years ago, I was drowning in my own mess, and you were stuck in that diner. Now look at us. Lila swallowed, the pizza suddenly heavy in her throat. She met his eyes, and for a moment, the room felt smaller. The air charged with something she'd been dodging for months. Yeah, she said softly. Feels like a lifetime ago. Ethan pushed off the wall, stepping closer, his boots scuffing the floor. It's more than that. You didn't just pull me out of a hole. Lila Wailu, when you're ready to win. You gave me a reason to keep going. This, he waved a hand at the room, but his eyes never left hers. This is us, what we built. And I don't know if I've ever said it right, but thank you. Her breath caught, and she set the pizza down, her hands suddenly unsteady. She'd heard gratitude before, quick thanks from diner customers, a nod from a teacher when she'd aced a rare test. But this was different. This was Ethan, the man who'd walked into her life like a storm and stayed to help her rebuild. She wanted to brush it off, crack a joke, but the weight of his words pinned her in place. You don't owe me anything, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. We're in this together, right? His lips curved, but there was something raw in his expression, something that made her pulse race. Right? He said, but the word felt like it carried more, like it was reaching for something neither of them had named yet. The moment stretched, fragile and heavy, until the vacuum's hum stopped, and a volunteer's voice called from the hall. Breaking the spell, Lila stepped back, clearing her throat. We should eat before this gets cold, she said, grabbing another slice and shoving it toward him. Ethan took it, his fingers brushing hers, and she pretended not to notice the spark that shot up her arm. They ate in companionable silence, the pizza box between them like a buffer against whatever had just passed. But Lila's mind was spinning. She'd spent so long keeping people at arm's length. Her mom gone too young, her dad a ghost who left before she could remember his face, her friends scattered by the grind of life. Ethan was different. He wasn't just a partner in this work. He was someone who got her, who saw the cracks in her armor and didn't try to fix them, just stood beside her while she patched them herself. It scared her. How much that meant? The next few months were a whirlwind. The literacy program took off, filling the classroom with more students than they'd planned for. Factory workers, single parents, immigrants piecing together a new life. Lila taught some of the classes herself, her voice growing steadier with each session. She'd never thought of herself as a teacher. But watching a man named Javier beam as he read his first full sentence, or seeing a woman named Aisha write a letter to her daughter, lit something inside her she hadn't known was there. Ethan was there too, less in the spotlight but always steady, fixing a busted projector, hauling in donated books, or just sitting in the back with a quiet smile that made her feel like she could do anything. But it wasn't all smooth. Money was tight, always tight, and the foundation's growth meant more pressure. Lila lay awake some nights, her tiny apartment feeling smaller as she stared at the ceiling, worrying about payroll, rent, the family's counting on them. Ethan felt it too. She saw it in the lines around his eyes, the way he'd rub his temples when he thought no one was looking. They leaned on each other, though in ways that didn't need words. A coffee left on her desk, A quick squeeze of her shoulder before a big meeting. A shared laugh over a donor's ridiculous demands. It was a language they'd built without meaning to. One evening, after a brutal day of back-to-back grant rejections, Lila found herself alone in the office, slumped over her desk with a headache pounding behind her eyes. The numbers on her laptop blurred, red ink mocking her. She didn't hear Ethan come in until he set a takeout bag beside her. Thai food, spicy enough to wake her up. "You're gonna burn out if you keep this up." "You're," he said, pulling a chair close. His voice was gentle but firm, the kind of tone that didn't let her argue. She sighed, rubbing her eyes. "We're bleeding money, Ethan. If we don't land something big soon, we'll have to cut programs." "I can't," her voice cracked, and she hated it, hated the vulnerability leaking out. "I can't let these people down." He reached across the desk, his hand covering hers, warm and steady. "You're not letting anyone down. We'll figure it out." "We always do." Lila looked at their hands, her heart thudding so loud she was sure he could hear it. She didn't pull away, though she knew she should. "Why do you believe in me so much?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Ethan's thumb brushed her knuckles, a small gesture that felt like a confession. "Because you believed in me when I didn't deserve it. Because you're the strongest person I know, and you don't even see it." Her breath hitched, and she met his eyes, seeing something there she'd been afraid to name. Something that had been growing since that first night at Daisy's. Through every late-night pizza, every shared victory, every quiet moment, she wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back. "And for now, it's wahanabi. That was enough." The breakthrough came a month later, a $200, Euro on a grant from a foundation Ethan had been wooing for months. Lila whooped when she saw the email, throwing her arms around him in a hug that caught them both off guard. His laugh rumbled against her, and when they pulled back, their faces were close, too close, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her, but he didn't, and she wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed. They poured the money into expanding more classes, a mobile food pantry, a mentorship program for teens. Lila's days were fuller, her heart heavier with the stories she carried. Kids who'd never had a real Christmas. Parents working 3 jobs to keep the lights on, but she carried hope, too. And Ethan was there, always there. The Rahasa, her anchor and her spark. One night, as snow dusted the city and the office glowed with string lights they'd hung for a holiday party, Lila stood by the window, watching flakes swirl. Ethan joined her, his shoulder brushing hers. "You happy?" he asked, his voice low. She thought about it, really thought, and felt a warmth spread through her. "Yeah, Nana," she said, turning to him. "You?" He nodded, his eyes soft, searching. "More than I've ever been." They didn't say the rest, not yet. But as the snow fell and the foundation hummed with life, Lila knew they'd get there. Together. Snowflakes clung to the window pane of the Caldwell Hope Foundation's office, catching the glow of the string lights and turning the glass into a mosaic of tiny stars. Lila Harper stood there, her breath fogging the cold surface, her reflection a hazy outline against the winter night. The holiday party buzzed behind her, volunteers laughing over cheap punch, kids from the mentorship program tearing into a pile of donated gifts, a scratchy rendition of Jingle Bells crackling through an old speaker. She'd spent the day organizing it all, her hands still sticky from taping decorations, her voice hoarse from shouting directions over the chaos. Now no, erasure, with the room warm and alive. She felt a quiet ache settle into her bones. Not exhaustion, exactly, but something deeper, something that tugged at the edges of her heart. Ethan Caldwell stepped up beside her, his presence a steady heat against the chill seeping through the window. He didn't say anything at first. Da just stood there, his shoulder brushing hers in that way that had become second nature. She could smell the faint cedar of his cologne, mixed with the pine from the scraggly tree they'd hauled in earlier. His flannel sleeve grazed her arm, and she fought the urge to lean into him, to let his solidity anchor her like it so often did. Instead, she kept her eyes on the snow, watching it blanket the street outside in a silence that felt like a secret. "You did this, Sir Mushishwana Sakar, he said finally, his voice low, rough with something that made her pulse skip. "All of it. Look at them." He nodded toward the room, where a girl named Mia, 16, shy, with a history of bouncing between foster homes, was giggling as she unwrapped a new sketchbook. Her face lit up like Lila had never seen it. Lila's throat tightened, her hazel eyes stinging as she watched Mia clutch the gift to her chest. "They did it," she said, her voice barely steady. "I just gave them a nudge." But she couldn't deny the pride swelling in her chest, sharp and sweet, like the first bite of an apple. This was what she'd fought for. Nights of scribbling plans, days of begging for donations, every scraped-together dollar and sleepless hour. It was messy, imperfect, but it was real. Ethan turned to her, his gray eyes catching the light, and there was something in them that made her breath catch. A softness. Our weight de sourire. A weight. A question he hadn't asked yet. "You don't give yourself enough credit," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "You're the heart of this. Lila, is servoasu. You always have been." Her stomach flipped, and she looked away, suddenly hyper-aware of how close he was, how the space between them felt charged. Like the air before a storm, she wanted to argue, to deflect with a joke like she always did, but the words stuck. He was right there, steady and sure, and she felt the walls she'd built, brick by brick over years of disappointment, start to tremble. "You're not so bad yourself." She managed her voice teasing but shaky, a lifeline to keep her from tipping over the edge of whatever this moment was. He chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through her, and shifted closer, his arm pressing against hers now. Deliberate but not pushy, un commentaire high praise, coming from you. His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. They held hers, searching, and she couldn't look away even if she'd wanted to. The party faded into a hum, the world narrowing to just them. Framed by snow and light, Lila's heart hammered, her palms damp despite the cold. She'd felt this pull before, late nights over coffee, quiet glances across a crowded room, but she'd always shoved it down, told herself it was just the work, just the adrenaline of building something together. But now, with his warmth seeping into her side and his breath mingling with hers in the chilly air, she couldn't lie to herself anymore. This wasn't just partnership. This was something else. Something that scared her as much as it thrilled her. "Ethan, she started, her voice barely a whisper, but she didn't know what came next. "Well, thank you." A confession, a plea to keep things simple. Before she could figure it out, a crash sounded from across the room. Mia had knocked over a tray of cookies, and kids swarmed to help, laughing as crumbs scattered. The spell broke, and Lila stepped back, her laugh shaky as she rubbed her hands on her jeans. "Guess I should clean that up." Ethan nodded, but his eyes lingered on her. He promised that this wasn't over. "I'll help," he said, and they moved together, falling back into the rhythm that had carried them this far. Partners. Friends, something more they hadn't named yet. The weeks after the party were a blur of snowstorms and growth. The foundation stretched its wings, opening a second site across town. A battered community center they'd begged the city to let them use. Lila threw herself into it, her days a marathon of painting walls, training new volunteers, and coaxing donors into opening their wallets. She loved it, the chaos, the purpose, the way it filled the hollow spaces she'd carried since she was a kid, with no one to lean on. But the nights were harder, alone in her apartment, with the wind rattling the windows and the TV flickering unwatched. She'd catch herself thinking about Ethan, his quiet strength, the way his laugh crinkled his eyes, the brush of his hand against hers. It was dangerous territory, and she didn't know how to navigate it. Ethan felt it too, she could tell. He'd linger after meetings, finding excuses to stay, fixing a leaky sink, sorting files she'd already organized. Their conversations stretched longer, dipping into things they'd never touched before. Her mom's death when she was 12, his dad's cold ambition that had pushed him into a life he hadn't wanted. One night, as they sat on the office floor, surrounded by grant applications, he looked at her, his voice soft. "You ever wonder what your mom would think of all this?" Lila froze, the question slicing through her like a blade. She hadn't talked about her mom in years. "Not really. She'd probably say I'm crazy," she said finally, her laugh brittle, running around with a billionaire, trying to fix the world. She was practical. Worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. Didn't have time for dreams. Ethan tilted his head, his eyes gentle but piercing. "Sounds like she'd be proud." You're doing what she couldn't, making sure no one else has to scrape by like that. Her chest ached, and she blinked hard, shoving a stack of papers between them like a shield. Maybe, she mumbled, but his words burrowed deep. Cracking something open she'd kept locked tight, the tension between them built. A slow burn that neither acknowledged but both felt. It came to a head one frigid February night. They'd been at the new site, setting up for a job fair, when a pipe burst, flooding the floor with icy water. Hours later, soaked and shivering, they sat in the office with a space heater humming, wrapped in scratchy blankets from a donation bin. Lila's teeth chattered, her wet hair plastered to her face, but she couldn't stop laughing at the absurdity of it. Two grown adults, drenched and miserable, still trying to save the day. Ethan laughed too, his breath visible in the dim light. But then he went quiet, his eyes locking on hers. "You're something else. You know that," he said, his voice rough. Unguarded, her laughter faded, her heart pounding as she met his gaze. "So are you?" she whispered, and it felt like a confession. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a drop of water, or maybe a tear. She couldn't tell. "Lila," he said, and her name in his mouth was a spark, igniting everything she'd been holding back. She leaned in. Or maybe he did. And then they were kissing, tentative at first, then desperate. Like they'd been waiting years for this. His lips were cold but soft, his hands steady as they pulled her closer. And she melted into him, the blanket slipping to the floor. When they pulled apart, breathless and wide-eyed, Lila's mind raced. "This complicates things," she said, her voice shaky but not regretful. Ethan grinned, his forehead resting against hers. "Yeah, but I'm not sorry. Me neither." "Minhana tumwatsuriter," she admitted. And for the first time, she let herself fall into him, into the messy, beautiful unknown. The foundation didn't stop growing. And neither did they. They navigated their new reality, stolen kisses between meetings, late nights tangled in each other, arguments that ended in laughter or something sweeter. It wasn't easy. The work was still grueling, the stakes higher with every life they touched. But together, they were unstoppable. Lila found her voice, her strength, the Reykjavik, her home in Ethan's quiet faith and fierce heart. And Ethan, Honanaberfunnen, with his acceptance, who'd once measured worth in dollars, found it in her, in the woman who'd saved him with a cup of coffee and a truth he couldn't ignore. Years later, as the foundation sprawled across cities, a network of hope for the overlooked, they stood together at a gala. Lila in a dress she'd never have worn at Daisy's, Ethan in a suit that fit him better than his old life ever had. He raised a glass, his eyes on her, to the woman who changed everything. He said, and the room cheered. But she only saw him. She raised her glass back, her smile wide, fearless. "To us, Ushaneshwar," she said, and meant it. The gala hall glittered under a canopy of chandeliers, the clink of champagne glasses and murmur of well-dressed donors filling the air like a symphony of privilege. Lila Harper stood near the edge of the room, her fingers tight around a flute of sparkling water. She'd never gotten the hang of champagne, the bubbles too sharp for her taste. The dress she wore, a deep green that hugged her frame and shimmered when she moved, felt like a costume, borrowed from a life she still didn't quite believe was hers. 5 years ago, she'd been scraping gum off diner tables. Now, she was here, rubbing elbows with people who threw around money like it was confetti. The contrast made her head spin, but she stood tall, her auburn hair swept up, her hazel eyes scanning the crowd with a mix of pride and unease. Ethan Caldwell was across the room, working it like he was born to, shaking hands, flashing that easy smile that could charm a snake out of its skin. His suit was sharp, charcoal gray, tailored to his broad shoulders, but there was a looseness to him now, a warmth that hadn't been there when he'd first walked into Daisy's diner all those years ago. He caught her eye mid-conversation, and his grin softened into something private, something just for her. Lila's stomach fluttered, a familiar ache that hadn't dulled with time. She nodded back, a small gesture that said, "I'm here," and he excused himself, weaving through the crowd toward her. "You look like you're plotting an escape," he said when he reached her, his voice low, teasing, as he slipped an arm around her waist. His touch was warm through the thin fabric of her dress, grounding her in the swirl of noise and light. "Maybe I am," she shot back. leaning into him just enough to feel his heartbeat against her side. These heels are killing me. And I swear that guy in the bow tie just offered me a yacht. What am I supposed to do with a yacht? Ethan laughed, a deep, rich sound that made her chest loosen. Tell him to donate it instead. We could auction it off, fund a whole new site. He tilted his head, studying her. You okay? You've got that look. What hunkana? Switch or shit this what look? She asked. Though she knew exactly what he meant, she could feel it, the tightness in her jaw, the way her shoulders crept up toward her ears. Big events like this still rattled her. No matter how many they'd done, she was used to gritty work, not glittery rooms. The one that says you'd rather be knee-deep in spreadsheets than schmoozing, he said, his thumb brushing her hip in a small, soothing circle. You don't have to stay. We've got this covered. One. Lila shook her head, forcing a smile. No way. I'm not leaving you to fend off Bowtie Guy alone. Besides, is Shirty Wamu, this is our night. 5 years. Ethan, we made it. His eyes softened, and he lifted his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. To 5 years, he said, his voice dropping to that quiet, reverent tone that always got under her skin. And to you, she clinked her glass against his, her throat tight. To us, she corrected, and took a sip, the water cool against the heat rising in her cheeks. The toast felt like a promise, one they'd been keeping since that first kiss in the flooded office. Through every fight and triumph that followed, the night wore on, a blur of speeches and applause. Ethan took the stage at one point, his voice steady as he talked about the foundation's reach. 10 sites now, thousands of lives touched. From job programs to shelters to youth centers, Lila stood in the wings, her arms crossed, her heart swelling as he spoke. He didn't mention her by name, but he didn't have to. Every word carried her imprint, their shared vision woven into the stats and stories. When he stepped down, the room erupted, and he found her in the shadows, pulling her into a quick, fierce hug that smelled of whiskey and home. You're a natural up there, she murmured into his shoulder, her voice muffled by his jacket. Only because you're behind me, he whispered back, and she felt his lips brush her hair before he pulled away, his hand lingering on hers as they rejoined the crowd. But the high of the gala couldn't last forever. A week later, reality crashed back in, a scandal, sharp and sudden, that threatened to unravel everything they'd built. It started with a leaked email, dug up by a tabloid hungry for dirt on Ethan's old life. The message was from his Caldwell tech days, a cold directive to slash benefits for workers already stretched thin. It wasn't new to Lila. She'd known about his past, the corners he'd cut before he'd walked into her diner, but seeing it splashed across headlines, twisted into a narrative of greed, hit like a punch to the gut. They sat in the office, the same cramped space where they'd eaten pizza and dreamed big, but now it felt suffocating. The TV blared in the corner, a pundit dissecting Ethan's fall from grace with glee. Lila muted it, her hands shaking as she turned to him. He was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands, his shoulders bowed like the weight of the world had finally caught up. I thought this was behind me, he said, his voice raw, brokenness in her. Dursaminason tyranny. I've spent years trying to make it right, and they still see me as that guy, the asshole in the suit. Lila knelt in front of him, her hands on his knees, forcing him to look at her. You're not that guy anymore, she said fiercely, her eyes blazing. You've changed, Ethan. We've changed things. This, she gestured to the room, the foundation's heartbeat pulsing through it. This is who you are now. They can drag up whatever they want, but they can't erase that. He lifted his head, his gray eyes red-rimmed, searching hers. What if they don't care? What if this tanks us? The donors, the programs, Lila. We could lose it all. Her stomach twisted, fear clawing at her, but she shoved it down. She'd faced worse, nights with no heat, days with no food, and she'd survived. They'd survive this too. Then we fight, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. We show them the truth. The numbers. The people. The lives who win. We don't let some sleazy reporter undo us. Ethan stared at her, and slowly, something shifted in his face, despair giving way to a flicker of resolve. He took her hands, his grip tight, grounding. You're right, he said, his voice strengthening. We fight. They did. The next morning, they called a press conference, raw, unpolished, In the foundation's main hall was staff and clients packed in behind them. Ethan spoke first, his voice steady but laced with regret as he owned the email, the choices he'd made. "I was that man," he said, facing the cameras head on. "But I'm not him anymore. This foundation is my proof, and hers." He gestured to Lila, who stood beside him, her chin high despite the nerves churning in her gut. When it was her turn, she stepped forward, her sneakers scuffing the floor, her words unscripted. "I'm not here to defend his past," she said, her voice ringing out. "I'm here to tell you what he's done since. What we've done, we've fed families, trained workers, given kids a shot, people like me, who never had one before. That's what matters. Judge us on that." The room was silent, then erupted, some cheers, some murmurs, but it didn't matter. Later what I'm on. They'd laid it bare. And as the cameras flashed, Lila felt Ethan's hand slip into hers. A silent, "We're okay." The fallout wasn't pretty. Some donors pulled out. The headlines lingered, but others stepped up, moved by the honesty, the grit. The foundation wobbled but held, its roots too deep to rip out. Months later, the storm had faded, replaced by a quiet spring. Lila stood in a community garden they'd built, one of their newer projects, her hands dirty from planting seedlings with a group of teens. Ethan was there too, kneeling beside a boy named Jamal, showing him how to press soil around a tomato plant. The sun was warm, the air sweet with earth. And as Lila watched Ethan laugh, his face open and free, she felt a peace settle over her. He caught her looking and stood, brushing dirt off his jeans as he walked over. "What one sort he asked, a grin tugging at his lips. She shrugged, her smile soft. "Unguarded. Just thinking how far we've come." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together like they'd done it 1,000 times. "And how far we'll go," he added, his voice a quiet vow. Lila nodded, her heart full. "See you, steady." They'd faced scandals, doubts, the ghosts of their past, and come out stronger. The foundation wasn't just their work, it was their life, their love. Ich bin one, their legacy. And as the garden bloomed around them, she knew they'd keep building, together, no matter what came next. The community garden buzzed with life under a late spring sun, the air thick with the scent of damp soil and budding flowers. Lila Harper knelt beside a row of marigolds, her hands caked with dirt as she pressed a seedling into the earth. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her auburn hair sticking to her neck in messy strands. But she didn't care. Around her, a dozen teens from the mentorship program chattered and laughed, their voices rising over the hum of bees and the occasional bark of a dog from the nearby street. This was her favorite part, hands-on, messy, real, watching kids who'd once flinched at eye contact now dig in with confidence, their futures taking root alongside the plants. Ethan Caldwell was a few rows over, his flannel sleeves rolled up to his elbows, showing Jamal how to stake a tomato plant without snapping the stem. His movements were patient, deliberate, his voice a steady murmur as he explained the trick to it. Lila watched him out of the corner of her eye, her chest tightening at the sight, his broad frame bent low, his dark hair falling into his face, the easy way he connected with the boy. He'd come so far from the haunted man in the diner, and yet every time she looked at him, she felt that same spark, that pull that had started it all. She shook her head, smiling to herself, and turned back to her marigolds before he caught her staring. "Miss Lila, you think these'll actually grow?" asked Tasha, a wiry 15-year-old with braids and a skeptical squint, holding up a drooping seedling like it was already a lost cause. Lila grinned, wiping her hands on her jeans as she scooted closer. "If you stop drowning it, yeah. Give it some love, not a flood." Here, she took Tasha's hand, guiding it to pat the soil gently. "Like that. It's gotta breathe." Tasha rolled her eyes but followed her lead, a grudging smile tugging at her lips. "You sound like my mom when she's fussing over her dumb houseplants." "Then your mom's got the right idea," Lila shot back, nudging her shoulder. "Stick with me. Kid in a wern. We'll make you a gardener yet." Across the garden, Ethan stood, stretching his back with a groan that made Jamal snicker. "You're old, man, teen," the boy teased, and Ethan ruffled his hair, laughing. "Watch it, or I'll make you carry all the mulch next time." Ethan retorted, but his eyes slid to Lila. Catching her mid-laugh with Tasha, his grin softened, and he ambled over, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "You're in your element out here," he said, dropping to a crouch beside her, his knee brushing hers. Lila shrugged, brushing dirt off her palms, beat sitting in an office. Tourism. These kids, they're why we do this. You know, she nodded toward Tasha, who was now showing another girl how to plant properly, her earlier skepticism replaced with a flicker of pride. Ethan followed her gaze, his expression quiet. Thoughtful, Kiyamaham. Makes me wonder what I'd have been like with someone like you around back then. His voice dipped, a rare crack of vulnerability slipping through. And Lila felt it like a tug on her heart. You turned out fine, she said lightly, but her eyes met his, holding them for a beat longer than she meant to. Better than fine. He didn't reply, just reached out and squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing a smudge of dirt on her knuckle. It was a small thing, but it sent a shiver up her spine, a reminder of how easily he could unravel her with a touch. She pulled back, clearing her throat, and stood, brushing off her jeans. Come on, she said, her tone brisk to cover the flush creeping up her neck. We've got a whole bed of carrots to plant before these kids mutiny. The afternoon stretched on, golden and warm, until the sun dipped low and the teens trickled out, lugging backpacks and shouting goodbyes. Lila and Ethan stayed behind, tidying up, stacking tools, sweeping the shed, moving in the comfortable silence they'd perfected over years. But there was a hum beneath it, a tension that had been building since the gala, since the scandal, since every moment they dodged or danced around what they both knew was there. As they locked the shed, the sky bruising purple with dusk, Ethan broke the quiet. You ever think about slowing down? He asked, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed. Lila paused, a rake still in her hand, and frowned. What turnights from them? Like taking a vacation. We've got too much going on. New sites opening next month. And the summer program's a mess. Not a vacation. He cut in, his voice steady but edged with something new. I mean us, this we're not sure we're one. He gestured between them, then out at the garden, the foundation's heartbeat pulsing in the distance. We've been running full tilt since day one. What if we took a minute, just us? Her stomach flipped, the rake slipping slightly in her grip. What are you saying, Ethan? She asked, her voice quieter now. Wary but curious, he stepped closer, his boots scuffing the dirt, his eyes locking on hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. I'm saying I love you, Lila, have for a long time. And I want more than this. More than stolen moments and late nights working. I want a life with you, not just a mission. The words hit her like a freight train, stealing the air from her lungs. She'd known it, felt it in every glance, every touch. But hearing it out loud was different. Raw and real, her heart raced, a wild mix of joy and fear crashing through her. Ethan, she started, but her voice faltered. Her mind spinning. Love wasn't a word she'd trusted, not since her mom died and her dad bailed, not since she'd learned to rely on herself alone. But Ethan, he'd never wavered, never left, even when she'd pushed him away. You don't have to say it back, he said quickly, misreading her silence, his hand running through his hair in that nervous way she'd come to adore. I just needed you to know. I'm not going anywhere. Okay. We can keep doing this however you want. I love you too, she blurted, cutting him off, the words tumbling out before she could overthink them. Her face burned, her hands trembling as she dropped the rake, letting it clatter to the ground. God, I can't believe I just said that. Ethan froze, his eyes widening, then softening into a smile that lit up the dusk. Yeah, when he asked, stepping closer, his voice thick with hope. Yeah, she said, a shaky laugh escaping her. I'm scared as hell, but yeah. He closed the gap, his hands framing her face, and kissed her, slow, deep, like he was pouring every unspoken moment into it. She kissed him back, her fingers curling into his shirt, the taste of dirt and spring, and him grounding her in a way nothing else ever had. When they pulled apart, breathless and grinning, he rested his forehead against hers. So what now? He murmured. Lila's mind raced, but for once, it wasn't with worry. Now we figure it out, she said one his son, her voice steady despite the wild beat of her heart. Together, the next few months were a shift, subtle but seismic. The foundation hummed along, new sites, new programs. But Lila and Ethan carved out space for themselves. To such her son must your soon, a weekend away in a cabin upstate. No cell service, just them and a crackling fire. Quiet mornings in her apartment, coffee brewing while he read the paper, and she sketched plans on napkins. It wasn't perfect. Arguments flared. Old fears crept in, but it was theirs. A life stitched together from the threads of everything they'd been through. One evening, as summer bled into fall, they sat on the cabin's porch, a blanket draped over their legs, the air crisp with the promise of change. Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket, his hands steady but his eyes nervous. "I've been carrying this around for weeks," he said, flipping it open to reveal a simple ring. Silver, no frills. Just like her. "Marry me." Lila, her breath caught, tears prickling her eyes as she stared at it. Then at him, "You sure you want to put up with me forever?" she teased, her voice wobbling. "Forever's not long enough," he shot back, his grin lopsided. "Hopeful?" She laughed, a bright, free sound, and nodded. "Yes, sir, Shiranumon, Shirimon," she said, and he slipped the ring on her finger, his hands shaking now. Tuvrewum. They kissed under a sky streaked with stars, the Foundation's legacy stretching behind them, their future unfurling ahead. Years later, at a ribbon cutting for the 20th site, Lila, now Lila Caldwell, stood beside Ethan, her hair streaked with gray, his face lined but still handsome. Their daughter, Miardi Yerwanshona, named for the girl with the sketchbook, ran through the crowd, all energy and light. The Foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams, a network of hope-spanning states, but it was still them at its core, two people who'd found each other in a diner and dared to build something more. As the crowd cheered, Ethan leaned close, his voice a whisper in her ear. "Worth it." Lila squeezed his hand, her ring glinting in the sun. "Every damn second," she said, and meant it. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as it sank behind the sprawling fields of the Caldwell Hope Foundation's newest site, a rural outreach center nestled in the rolling hills of Tennessee. Lila Caldwell stood on a makeshift stage, her hands clasped around a microphone, the cool October breeze tugging at the edges of her jacket. Her auburn hair, now threaded with silver, danced in the wind, and her hazel eyes sparkled with a mix of weariness and pride. At 42, she carried the years in the lines around her mouth, etched by laughter and worry in equal measure. But her stance was as fierce as ever, rooted like the oak trees lining the property. Beside her, Ethan Caldwell adjusted the collar of his flannel shirt, his gray eyes scanning the crowd, hundreds strong. A tapestry of faces from the Foundation's decades of work. Volunteers, staff, or Sunranayawans, families they'd lifted up, kids who'd grown into adults under their care, all gathered to celebrate the 25th site, a milestone neither of them had dared dream of back in that cramped diner. His hair was thinner now, his shoulders a little stooped, but the warmth in his smile hadn't faded. And when he glanced at Lila, it deepened into something that still made her heart skip after all these years. And Anton, their daughter, Mia, 12 in all limbs, darted through the crowd below, her dark curls bouncing as she handed out programs with a grin that mirrored her father's. She'd inherited Lila's fire too, her sharp tongue and stubborn streak a daily challenge and delight. Watching her weave between people, Lila felt a pang. Time was relentless, slipping through her fingers like sand. But it had given her this, a family, a purpose, a life she'd once thought impossible. The microphone crackled as Lila stepped forward, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. 25 years ago, I was pouring coffee in a rundown diner, thinking that was all I'd ever be. She began, her words carrying over the rustle of leaves and the hum of anticipation. I didn't know then that a stranger in a fancy coat would walk in and change everything. Didn't know we'd build this together with all of you. She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd, landing on familiar faces. Tasha, now a botanist who'd designed this garden. Jamal, a carpenter who'd built the center's beams. Aisha, a teacher running literacy classes here. This isn't just a place, it's a promise that no one gets left behind, that every hand gets a lift, every voice gets heard. That's what we fought for. That's what we'll keep fighting for. The crowd erupted, applause rolling over her like a wave, and she stepped back, her chest tight with emotion. Ethan took her place, his hand brushing hers in a quiet anchor as he leaned into the mic. I was lost when I met Lila, he said, his voice rough but clear, a man with everything and nothing. She didn't just save me, she showed me what matters. This, he gestured to the center, its fresh paint gleaming in the fading light. the field stretching beyond. This is her heart, and all of yours, beating together. I'm damn proud to be part of it. He turned to her, his eyes glistening, and the crowd cheered again. But Lila barely heard it. She saw only him, the man who'd stumbled into her life, broken and searching, and stayed to build something unbreakable with her. Mia clambered onto the stage, wedging herself between them, and Ethan slung an arm around her shoulders while Lila ruffled her hair. The three of them, a unit against the world. The ribbon cutting came next. A giant pair of scissors passed to Mia, who sliced through the red satin with a dramatic flourish that drew laughs. The center's doors opened, and people poured in. Kids racing to the playground, adults touring classrooms and workshops, volunteers firing up a grill for the celebration. Lila and Ethan hung back, watching from the stage as their legacy unfolded. The air smelled of barbecue and pine, the sound of chatter and music weaving through the dusk. "You think we've done enough?" Lila asked suddenly, her voice soft, almost lost in the noise. She leaned against him, her shoulder fitting into the crook of his arm like it was made for it. Ethan tilted his head, studying her. "Enough's not the word. We've done more than I ever thought possible. But you're not done. Are you? Are you?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes were serious. Knowing her too well, she laughed. A low, warm sound. "Never. There's always more to do, more people to reach." He nodded, pulling her closer. "Good thing I signed up for the long haul." Then, sorry, they stood there. The sky darkening to a deep indigo, stars winking into view one by one. Mia ran back to them, breathless, tugging at Lila's hand. "Mom, come see the mural. They painted you and Dad on it. Well, kinda. It's got a diner and everything." Lila let herself be dragged off, Ethan trailing behind with a chuckle. The mural spanned the center's east wall, a vibrant sweep of color showing a diner under a stormy sky. Two figures standing together, their hands outstretched to a crowd of others. It wasn't perfect. Their faces were vague, more symbol than portrait. But it was them, their story captured in bold strokes. Around it bloomed gardens and buildings, faces of people they'd touched, a testament to the ripple they'd started. "Looks about right," Ethan said, slipping an arm around Lila's waist as Mia bounced beside them, pointing out details. "You and me, taking on the world." Lila leaned into him, her eyes tracing the mural, then lifting to the stars. "Yeah, Toninanam," she murmured, "and winning." That night, as the crowd thinned and the center glowed with lantern light, Lila and Ethan sat on a bench overlooking the fields. Mia had crashed in the car, sprawled across the back seat with a half-eaten burger in her lap, and the quiet wrapped around them like a blanket. The foundation's work would go on, new challenges, new dreams, but for now, they rested, their hands clasped between them, the ring on Lila's finger catching the moonlight. "I'd do it all again," Ethan said suddenly, his voice a whisper in the stillness. "Every stumble, every fight, every late night. For it and him. What's for so this numb?" Lila turned to him, her smile soft, unguarded. "Me too," she said, and squeezed his hand. The weight of their years, a comfort, not a burden. "But let's not stop now." He laughed, Eddie pulling her close, and they sat there. The world they'd built humming around them, their love the steady pulse at its core. The stars above burned bright, a map of where they'd been and where they'd go. And as the night deepened, Lila felt it, peace, purpose, home. Home. They'd started with a cup of coffee and a conversation. And now, ikimam. Here they were, not just survivors, but architects of something bigger, something lasting. The Caldwell Hope Foundation would outlive them, its roots deep, its branches wide, a legacy of grit and grace. And as Lila rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, the faint sound of crickets rising from the fields, she knew they'd done more than enough. They'd done everything. Together. Hey everyone. Welcome back, or if you're new here, hey Kiyamasuwum. Glad you stopped by. You just stepped into the world of Lila and Ethan. Two regular people who turned a rainy night and a cup of coffee into something epic. A legacy of hope, grit, and heart. If you love their journey, from that beat-up diner to changing lives across the country, then stick around. We've got more stories like this, real, raw, and full of soul coming your way. Hit that subscribe button below. Join the crew And let's keep building something amazing together. Don't miss out. See you in the next one.